Hi, and welcome to another episode of Kasper On BI. I'm very excited about today's episode. Today, we have one of the superstars of Power BI on the call. Today, we're going to talk to Marco Russo about enterprise data models. What are they? Do we still need them in this self-serve world? What benefits do they have? How does it work? These are questions that are talked about a lot on the social media, at conferences, or wherever, because the world is more and more going to self-serve, but where does the traditional enterprise data model fit? And we're going to talk about that today. So let's go to the episode. So hi, Marco. I'm super honored to have you here. Of course, everyone already knows you, but still, can you share who you are, what you do, your company, for those, like probably no one who watches this channel has not seen you before, but yeah, please do.
Well, my name is Marco Russo. As you can listen from my accent, I'm from Italy. I've been working in business intelligence for too many years now. I have seen the first all-up service extension in SQL Server when it happened. I will not tell you the year, so you can do your search on internet, your homework to know how many years we are talking about. And in the last few years, I worked more and more in tabular, in DAX, which is the language of tabular, which, by the way, is also a technology used in Power BI. And for a living, we produce content, which we deliver as training or books or courses in classroom. And we also provide some consulting, but much of our business is the training, or to improve the productivity of people that create semantic models with Power BI and analysis services.
Yeah, and everyone has your books. Like I can't see them now, but they're right behind me. So
yeah, I have several copies here if you want.
Yes, of course. So yeah, no, of course, you guys are if we need to know DAX, SQL BI is where you need to go. And of course, I will share links in the descriptions too. But one of the questions I always like to ask is, were you always into data? And how did you get started with data?
We go too back in the past, but I started working in computer as a developer, right? So my first days were, just writing code. I started in BASIC, then immediately assembler, and then C, C Sharp, no, C, C++, C Sharp only many years later. And as a developer, yeah, sooner or later you meet the data. So I used the relational databases, Oracle, SQL, and I started actually working in data more, not with Microsoft, but with Oracle, with some data mining product that was using Oracle as data source, but actually the product was not from Oracle. So Oracle was just the backend, but I had to learn also the Oracle syntax for writing queries in SQL at the time. And because I had this skill, when Microsoft entered the game, I already had some knowledge about data warehouse, data marts, and the data mining at that time. And so it was a natural follow-up. And so I still have my skills as a developer, but it's more a hobby today. Sometimes I contribute to some tools for the community, but it's not my my main job. And sometimes I feel maybe there are too many things in the development environment that it's hard to follow everything. So I'm still a .NET developer, not very much a front-end developer for JavaScript, and the tools for HTML5, CSS, and so on.
Yeah, it's definitely changed. So you were early, right? I still remember when I just joined Microsoft, actually even before, you were really early to, because you guys were, I remember you way back when MDX, it's always like Marco, Alberto, Chris, MDX, multidimensional, but you guys, not as much as Chris, which I always keep teasing him about, but we're early to embrace Power Pivot and the self-service world. Even though you were the leading MDX gurus, many professionals in the beginning thought, okay, this is never going to go. How did you see this? And why did you make a different choice?
That's an interesting question, because I want to go back in time and tell you that when Microsoft launched .NET, the platform, the technology platform for, I was there at the launch. It was a PDC, I don't remember where, and it was a huge event. It was a huge change for people working in Windows. And what I have seen at that time was the innovation driven by a few technologies that were implemented in the in the Microsoft environment. It was something new. It was actually not completely new. I mean, there were already other concepts already present in other platform, but the implementation was better. There were many things well designed, not everything, but many things well designed, and so we jumped on the wagon. Even though I was using other tools as a developer, I seen, okay, this is where this will the change, this is an innovation that could make sense, and I have seen the future there, and it was fun. So when we have seen DAX, at the beginning, to be honest, I didn't understand the implications, because the way it was presented initially, it seemed like, okay, this is just an Excel add-in closed in Excel, not something you could have been able to expand or create bigger models. It seemed something like, okay, this is just an Excel add-in. What's the matter? But we were in Seattle at the presentation. The first time it was Gemini. It was called Gemini, the product Gemini.
Yeah, SQL Pass probably.
Of the product. Yeah. And at dinner we met some people in the development team, because the development team was the same of analysis service. So we already knew many people because we were involved with MDX, multidimensional. I also was a beta tester of multidimensional when it was the first release of analysis services multidimensional, not all up service, but the following one that had a real development environment, the Visual Studio. I was a beta tester. I provided several bugs, so I was already in touch for this reason with people of the development team, and they said, well, look, because we said, come on, this is a joke, right? We have seen the presentation today. It was a joke. Why should we bother about that? I mean, it doesn't make sense. Well, you know what? Think about this, think about that. They started to, describe many things that could have happened in terms of architecture and in terms of the language, which we didn't have time to understand. They started to describe the features of the language in a more detailed way that we weren't able to catch when we have seen the presentation. And so at that point we have seen, oh, wait a minute, we could be the beginning of something new. This could be a language that could replace or be used side by side with MDX. If even just to preserve our position, we know MDX, there is not much more to learn about MDX. There is a new language, so we have to learn it. So it was just a no-brainer, but it was also interesting from other point of views, just technical point of views. That that was the decision. Then we would not have been able to imagine the adoption that the language would have had in the following years, thanks to Power BI. Because if it was just for analysis services, it would have been just the size of analysis services with MDX, not much more. We wouldn't have seen a big increase of orders of magnitude of the adoption like we have seen by using DAX with Power BI, because Power BI made it possible to use the same technology you had in analysis services with just a simple PC, no complex setups, much easier.
No servers. Yeah,
no servers too.
So that's so you guys were a bit earlier than me, but for me too, it was the same. And I was doing multidimensional models, not the same level as you guys, but I was doing multidimensional models, and then I saw Gemini for the first time, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So yeah. All right, cool. So let's go back, because we talked already kind of about self-service and big and enterprise models. So that's what I want to talk about today, because you see, what triggered this episode was this tweet you send out referencing someone else's post, not on data models, but do we still need data warehouse? And I was actually thinking about it. There's a lot of discussions happening too about self-service world versus enterprise data models. So let's start with a big question that a lot of people are asking, and there's a lot of discussions around: do we still need enterprise data models?
Well, that's a good question, because it always depends on the definition, right? So um, let's start, let's see the problem from another perspective. If we think about the self-service BI, right? The self-service BI means, okay, anybody can get data and make analysis. And technically, when you have data and you start the analysis, in a way, you're creating a model, right? We can call it semantic model or not, doesn't matter. There is a model. Once you have more than one table, I mean, if you have only one table and you just do the sum, you're using Excel. Fine. It's not that complex, right? So we did this much before relational databases. Come on. So it's just Excel. So if we do something more complex, which means that usually we have maybe two or more tables, we have relationships. And from another point of view, we start creating calculations that are not just a sum of a column, something more complex. I don't know what, but it could be many things. And so at this point, you have two options. You have option number one: who creates the report also creates the model. And I would say this is the non-corrected model. So the model is self-service, totally. And quality control. I mean, there are many things that in a company will not have been accepted. The reason why you have bureaucracy in a large company is because you want to follow procedure, you want to standardize things. And when we talk about data, okay, this is the revenues for this quarter. If everybody creates the calculation in their own way, interpreting the data as they want, you end up having 10 people at the same meeting bringing 10 numbers for the same quarter that are different. This is unavoidable. So in order to avoid that, you have, okay, but wait a minute, we centralize the ERP, we have, the report created by our ERP that says, okay, this is the revenue. And you use that as a data source for something else. This is just to simplify. But once again, many times it is not just the sum of a column, it is something more complex. So even the ERP doesn't know the number that you want to extract for your analysis. So in this process, at a certain point, someone says, oh, okay, I need this formula, I need this logic, I need this relationship. And if the data is not as good as it should be, I do this cleaning of the data. Okay. So you are curating a model. So now we have a curated model. Curated model could be Power BI, 3 tables, relationships, and a few measures. It's a model. You going to another extreme, you have a company that has 10 people just to create one model that is used by hundreds or thousands of people in the company that just create reports, but they don't create new measures. This way, you know that the numbers have been validated. Someone published a model that has been checked, and the number has been validated because you want to publish good numbers. And so we call this a curated model. Now, you can see that not curated model is basically Excel or something that you do, but without any control, any check by anyone else. Or curated model, you have someone that is in charge of the model, which means that it is in charge of being responsible of the numbers that the model produces. Now, if you think that a company can get rid of a curated model, I will say, no, it's impossible. If we want to enter into the discussion about when do we consider a curated model a semantic model or not, okay, this is just a question of how we want to define names.
I actually do have that question lined up. So
sorry,
I actually do have that question lined up for you. So
Okay.
No, but I think
Yeah. And so basically, this is from my point of view, when I think to the semantic model, I include a big set that includes all these models. Now, of course, not every company has 10 people working on a huge enterprise semantic model. And also those companies, maybe they have that model for a few critical metrics of the company, but for many other smaller projects, they don't have the same amount of resources available. And so they do something smaller, but at the same time, they still create semantic models because it's the easiest way to reuse the business logic that has been already created. You don't want to do that, okay, but you are just moving your information in the report, which is much harder to reuse in other reports. Just like in Excel, you create a lot of formulas, and then when you have a new Excel file and you want to replicate the business logic, you have to copy the formula, or maybe you don't know the meaning of the formula, you create something that looks similar, but is not the same. And the same can happen with the technologies that we have.
yeah. So I do want to go back to that question because, like, what does it mean to make a enterprise data model? Do you regularly see, like, is it someone who goes ahead and creates something in Power BI Desktop, publishes it to the service, and calls it an enterprise model, or is it different characteristics? It's different flow of how you build it, where the data comes from, and setting these things up, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would say that we don't have we cannot think that we can say, okay, this is the right thing to do for everyone. So
Yes.
there are different companies, different cultures, and when I talk about culture, I talk about data culture, right? Because
Yeah.
the level of the data culture of the company can make a big difference in in the requirement that you might have to do that. From my perspective, so if I talk about my personal experience, I have seen pretty much everything from the company that has 10 people working in a single model to the company that is large but has a small number of people creating models in Power BI that are critical to run the company at a certain point. And previously, when they didn't have Power BI, they simply had huge Excel files that required weeks to be refreshed every month. And now they do the same with Power BI. Now,
Yeah.
if you look at these companies and you say, wait a minute, you should, for the size of the company and importance of this data, you should dedicate a team to this, and you deserve it. You can pay for that, but they simply don't have the data culture to do that. So they say, no, we it's good as it is, and so they move forward this way. We can talk a lot about that, but I mean, every company makes their own decision. I can just say that, okay, we can see every behavior of this type. So I don't think that there is a good way. And to make another example, it depends on the flexibility you have also to make changes. Example one: the company doesn't have a data culture. The easiest way for the company is to hire a consultant to create the model. The model, not only the model, the report, everything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When you outsource this, you don't care about the technology that they are using because basically you don't know what to say about that. And you just look at the result. And if the report doesn't have something that you need other hours of your consultants. And the other side of this, you have the company that brings everything in house, and they maybe hire a consultant just in terms of I need a few hours of someone that knows I don't know, SQL, but the knowledge of the model, let's say the knowledge of the report and the ability to maintain the reports over time is in house. Okay, this is a big difference. So those companies that have everything in house, it's strange, but they are more likely to not need a huge data warehouse because they are able to change everything if they are so flexible. Whereas a company that requires, that follows the protocol, right? And we have to do this, we have to create the analysis, we have to do this, we have to do that. Those companies need a data warehouse more because without that, as soon as they change consultant company, they lose the memory of what they did, and so they need something centralized. Of course, probably the best thing is something in the middle. But again, I will not suggest a large corporation, oh, ignore the data warehouse, you don't need it. Come on. For a few data, you need it. Not for everything, but
Yeah.
financial data, you want it. Human resources, you probably want it. A few critical metrics of the company, you probably want it. Marketing analysis for a few campaign that change over time, and every time you change the data. So today it's a social media campaign. Tomorrow you go advertising on TV. After tomorrow you invent something else.
COVID. Yeah.
The differences in data is so wide that you change the model every time. So at that point, something too rigid doesn't make sense. But do we want to talk about the balance sheet of a company? Come on, that model is always the same.
Yeah. You have to get the right numbers.
Yeah.
All right. That makes sense. So, interestingly, so you talked a few times about large models. Is that also a characteristic? So I'm trying to get, what are some of the characteristics that make an enterprise data model? Like, when would you say it is an enterprise data model? Because there's also a lot of cases and times where it's just some guy who built this amazing model that everyone starts to use. Is that also an enterprise data model?
So, the size can affect the technology that you have to use, right? Because depending on the data volume you have to manage, you might afford certain technologies or not, and that's a detail. But I would make a distinction about the complexity of the model and the importance of the model. From my point of view, the importance and the value of the data that you get from that, and the frequency that you have reading the data, makes it more or less important for making a decision. I want this in an enterprise data model. I mean, it's a simple example, but everybody in sales, the people in sales, in the sales branch of a company, they look all the times at the numbers, no matter what. They don't really care about, do we have an enterprise data model or not? They just want to look at some report. Maybe they want to download the data in Excel because they have their own way to look at the data. But the idea is that the data source for the numbers that you produce must be reliable, must produce the right numbers, because the day that data source fails, you have a huge problem, not only with external customers, but with your people, the people in the company, that could be upset because, oh, now I cannot meet my goal for the quarter because I had wrong numbers until 2 days before, and now I'm not able to get my bonus. You are at risk of losing people just because of an error like that. So think about not just the consequence, the direct consequence. Oh, this number is just internal. We don't report. We're not a public company, so we don't have the real need to publish this data to other authorities every quarter. Okay, that's a possibility if you're a private company. But again, providing wrong numbers internally could have other side effects that could have a cost over time. So the importance of the data is so high that you want to make sure that the numbers are good, are reliable. Every day you have the numbers. And so in that condition, a process that produces that model will be a good idea. Depending on the size of the company, I will consider, I want a pipeline when I publish anything, and I want tests to validate any change that is published before it is published. These are just examples. Yes, pipelines in Power BI do something like that, but for more complex models, it's not enough. So the idea is that there should be something to control the process, because otherwise any mistake could have other side effects that have a cost that is too high, and it is a way to create an insurance over that cost. So the size, the data volume is not really what I would analyze first. First of all, I want to analyze how strategic is important, and then the choice of the tools and the architectural choices are also driven by the data volume, because I know that if I have a model that is 20 megabytes, I can basically use whatever I want. If I have 20 gigabytes, I have a few restrictions. If I had 20 terabytes, I have other restrictions. And so depending on the size and the data volume, I have more constraints. But it doesn't change the approach from my point of view.
Yeah. And actually, you brought up a good point. So it's more about what the requirements are, and that also goes for the tooling that you use, right? Because Power BI Desktop is great for self-service users, but for enterprise users, maybe not. And how often do you see that? Like for those enterprise projects, using other tools?
I mean, this is every day. I'm biased because, of course, I receive requests from companies that have problems, right? So I don't receive, I mean, company that is happy with what they have, they don't call us, right? So so there is a bias in what, but
that's kind of the same. That's my life too. Yeah.
I know, but because of that, I always see the problems that are not solved. Another problem that is not immediately visible is the productivity. I mean, Power BI is wonderful, but when it comes to maintain a model that has more than 5 or 6 tables and more than 20 measures, it immediately shows the lack of productivity. Lack of productivity means that in order to complete a task, you need more time. That's it. And if your task is to create new measures, test new measures, import new data, check the relationship, validate this, validate that, I mean, it's simple. Power BI doesn't work with 2 monitors. And most of the companies today think that 2 monitors is the normal workstation you should have.
For developers, yeah.
Well, I don't see this happening. I see that I've been in many companies where the 2 monitors became a rule for everybody, not just the developers. Even because just because they have the email in one monitor and Excel in another, or the website or whatever.
Yeah.
Many, now that we have the with the pandemic, everybody has a notebook, but it's common to have an external monitor, and the 2 monitor became the small notebook monitor and the largest monitor you have. But most of the times you have 2 different screens, not with the same display. You have 2 windows with 2 different content in the 2 screens. So to me, it's very common to think that people use 2 monitors if they have a desktop environment where they work. Of course, if you are working with your notebook on at Starbucks, probably you have only 1 monitor. But usually, when you are in your day-to-day job, it's common you have at least 2 monitors. And Power BI doesn't use 2 monitors. And when you have to look at the diagram when you write a measure, you cannot do anything. But as soon as you open an external tool, you can, because you can keep the diagram in 1 monitor and the editor in another. So you can work in a more productive way.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. So what about grow up stories? Do you see that happening too? Like you have a model that has been built by someone in the organization, and then it turns into an enterprise model. And what are some of the things that need to happen then?
Well, that is to be honest, this is a scenario I have seen something from some customer, but usually when you have, so as usual, there are many different situations. It happens that a model that started as a small project, personal project, sometimes grows at the point that is shared with other users, and it becomes a key part of the decisions made by a team in the company. So it doesn't scale at the level of 10,000 people will use the report I created. But instead of having a single model used by just one person, you start having maybe 20, 30 people using the report that has been created starting from your model. This happens, especially in companies that have some data culture, or just because in a company, someone, for some reason, start to work with data and probably likes the technology or the result that they can produce. in an enthusiastic way involve other people in, in using and consuming the report. If I think at the cases where I have seen this, which are not many, because usually we work more with, larger groups when they have problems with big models, but several times we receive requests from just individuals that are working alone in a model, and so their model is used by themselves or by a small number of people. And usually when this happens, my experience is that it doesn't happen because the company created the data culture. It's because they had this interest and they cultivated the interest up to the point that they escalated quickly. The company that has an organized effort, usually they move everyone up step by step, and so almost everyone becomes able to create simple models, simple measures, not something complex, but they make them autonomous in creating their own small models. Well, in those companies, this key figure that has control over an important report is less frequent, probably because everyone is owner of their own small part that is of interest for their work, and so probably this is. But my sample is too small, so I cannot talk for everyone. Probably every situation happens in the real world. We have huge numbers with Power BI.
Yeah, that's definitely true. So okay, so maybe going back, you talked about it for a little bit. What is the difference in a large size-wise model to a small? Like, you have to think about, you said it already, like architecturally you have to think about it differently. I still point people to the session I think Alberto did on the 6 terabyte tabular model. I mean, it's and so I don't think much has changed since then about those things. Of course, we have aggregations now and things like this, but still, what is it? What makes it different, and at what point does it change?
So, thinking about Power BI, because in this case, I think that the simplest case to describe is what happens in Power BI. My perception is that there are two things that can happen. One is that the query becomes slow. But usually so you started the model at the beginning was good, but over time, the query became slower. 99% of the times, the problem is just the optimization of the model or the DAX code or both, so that it is more efficient. It was inefficient at the beginning, but at the beginning it was so small that nobody have seen the problem.
Yeah.
But usually, if you have a model where you can ignore the problem of the refresh, usually the model should be fast. I don't see the problem of the performance. Now, what happens usually if you have very simple measures? You don't notice any performance issue usually. But the problem that you might recognize is, oh, now I need more than 2 hours to refresh my model, and I cannot refresh my model in Power BI Pro, or it's just taking so much time that even though the data would have been available at 5 a.m. in the morning, I have to wait until 11 in the morning just to get my data refreshed, and that's a problem. Well, the refresh problem is what is usually a better leading indicator of the situation. Okay, you need to do a better structure of what you're doing. Instead of just importing a bunch of data without worrying about how you implemented transformation, now you have to think about what you're doing. Because yes, you have incremental refresh, but you know what? It can be used only if you have a certain structure of your data. Otherwise, it is useless.
Yeah.
Depending on the transformation that you created in Power Query, you might have transformation that have to use your fact table, for example. And so even though you partition that, but you don't affect much the transformation time for a few side tables that have to extract the data from the fact table to create some dimension, for example. So there are a number of things that can happen at that point. So yes, having the ability to have incremental refresh is a huge feature in Power BI. Being able to use it requires you to have a good model, because otherwise it's very complex to use.
Yeah.
And usually when you reach the level where the refresh time is too long and I have to use incremental refresh, but I cannot use incremental refresh because, and you write the reason, you probably recognize, my model now I have to manage my model. I can no longer use my model without worrying about anything. And usually the refresh time, I think, is a better leading indicator, because the performance, it really depends on the measure that you write more than anything else. And before you have a serious performance issue, even though you optimize everything else, you need to reach a few 100 million rows imported. Okay, direct query, another story. But if you import the data and you have just 100 million rows, everything should be faster. You shouldn't be worried about the performance.
Yeah.
If you have a problem, you can optimize it. Usually.
Makes sense. Yeah. So and then okay, actually that's really interesting, because you know oftentimes people talk about the fact. I mean, actually, I see the same happening on our side. It is often when you get into. I actually didn't think really about it, but oftentimes we talk about DAX and performance and all of these things. But you're absolutely right. Once you start thinking about partitioning strategies and things like this, then you need to think about the whole like flow, like from data source to how do you structure it to how do you load it into Power BI, and actually when you do that, then DAX becomes easier too, right?
Of course,
because the model is nice.
The best and faster DAX code is the one that you don't have to write. So it's easy. You have to write just if SAM solves your problem. It's easier, it's faster, it's everything.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, cool. So one other topic that I wanted to talk to you about is, so we're also now seeing more and more people talk about data lakes, data lake houses, all of these things as a central data source for the model. And usually it is just just load in all the data, a lot of details, everything that we know about our customers, the sales events, the factory, everything. Now they say, okay, we just want to build this model on top of it with a lot of details. What do you recommend? What are you seeing?
So I'm always uncomfortable in answering to questions about these problems, because from my perspective, I mean, I'm a very technical person. Okay, so I'm a very technical person. I completely understand the differences between data lake, data warehouse, relational databases, clusters, non-cluster, column store, all this stuff. I like them.
Mm-hmm.
But does it really matter for the business whether you're using a technology or another one? I don't think so. To be honest, there could be a difference in the implementation cost, choosing one technology or another, depending on your goals. And my perspective is that many of these names are just actually a way to try to sell a product that solves a process issue. What does it mean? Let me explain. I have seen many, too many times in my career in IT, the rise of a new technology that was supposed to solve a problem, while the problem was actually a technical debt, or not a technical debt, but something you didn't do your homework, right? Example: I collect data from a form on the website. So sorry if I do a completely different example, but I just want to clarify. I create a form. The form doesn't validate the data well. I just write the data somewhere, and then I have to create an analysis of this data. And you know what happens. If you don't validate the data at the beginning, you have to do some other work after that to clean up the data, because the data quality is not that good. So you have to, we call this a technical debt, even though it's technical in the sense that I have to do something later because I didn't do my homework at the beginning. I didn't create a form with a required validation. You can enter any 2 letters code for the state, whereas in the United States, you have a limited number of combinations that are valid. You can use the province in other countries, whatever, right? The country code, the same thing.
Yeah.
Phone number, whatever. So I remember, now we have master data management. With master data management, you will solve the problem. And an IT manager says, oh, wow, now I get this solution, problem solved. Well, when you buy a product, the product can offers you a new technology to pay your technical debt, but you still have to do your homework. Possibly, instead of spending 1 day, you will spend 1 hour thanks to the product. But the cost will not be zero. And if you're not allowing to spend more time some time on working on the new technology, the problem will not be solved by itself. With another problem, you can delete the data that contains an invalid state. Remember the form. I received 100 answers to a form online, and I had to discharge 50% of them because I had an invalid code. And you know what? If you implemented this up front, you could have saved most of the 50% of forms that were invalid, because you would have been able to fix the problem up front. So every time you delay the solution of a technical debt, potentially you have to pay interest for the debt that you created. It works in economy this way, and IT is not that different. So the idea that you can just put your Excel files, text files, CSV files, XML files, JSON files in a single repository without worrying about the structure, the content, validating, relationships, who cares? I have everything is there because now it's in a single place. It should be easier. Well, when I put I don't know if you ever made a relocation, and when you do a relocation, you put all your stuff in a single box, and then you move the box. Now the problem is that when you need something out of the box, finding the stuff that you need is not easier, it's much harder if you don't have a good organization. If you created 20 boxes in your relocation and you didn't put labels on the boxes, you know what? Now you're in trouble because you don't know where your stuff is. So it's similar here. Yes, we can simply move everything in a single place, but this is just a technical implementation. So let's say storing data in a relational database is expensive, more expensive than storing data in just a file. I get it. I don't want to store the web log of my website on a relational database just because it is too expensive and it is also slow. I prefer to keep that data in a CSV file. But at the same time, if I have some data in a relational database in a well-organized structure, moving this data out of there to move them in an unstructured format, in a text file without any information about the metadata and the validation of the fields, I don't think is a good idea, even though I have seen someone trying to do that and thinking that it is a good idea. Because when you need to get the data out of that box, you say, what is the meaning of this field? What is the connection with other tables? You are going to lose the metadata that the relational database had. And coming back to our initial discussion, when you create a semantic model, you create another level, an additional layer of organization between your data. It is an information, let's call it documentation if you want, that doesn't exist if you don't create a semantic model. So that information can help you navigating across your data. You want to get rid of it, of course, no problems. You just have to pay the price of providing this information that you don't want to keep in your model, because when you want to consume the data, you have you need an information that you didn't store in the repository. So all that said, it's clear that if I consider data lake or like a set of databases like a folder with files, to me it's just a technical device. It doesn't, by itself, it doesn't provide me any added value. It could be a less expensive way to access data, I get it, but I don't see this is a solution. Is a solution to exactly what problem? Because if my problem is I want to analyze data, okay, you are providing me, I don't know, I want to go from the place where I want to go from Italy to London. I can go by car, by bus, by plane. These are tools, right? The solution, I still have to make a plan, make a decision about at which time I want to depart. And sometimes it could be more convenient to go by train, because if I had to stop in Paris, for example, you know what? It's better to do a two-stop, and because there is an overhead using the plane, check in, check out, go to the gate. Sometimes makes the train more affordable or also faster sometimes. Just to describe, different tools have different characteristics, and it is not that one is better than another all the times. It depends. So the data lake could be a good tool for a few things. Thinking that, oh, this is the new way to create a data warehouse. I don't know what is the problem of the data warehouse. The fact that they run on a relational database. Who said that the data warehouse has to run on a relational database? Nobody. The data warehouse is a structure of data. The tool where you implement the data warehouse is just the physical device where you store the data. It could change, of course. And why not using the data lake? But the data lake by itself is not a solution.
But so imagine it. So let's say, I mean, we do see people doing that, like structuring it as if it were like a data warehouse. The biggest difference, I think, with this compared to what we had in the past is it unlocks access to more data, because usually it's locked away in SAP or whatever other system that they now all start loading and have available in that data lake. I see a lot of these things are the same as what it used to be in the data warehousing world, right? Where you have a staging area where all the raw data, and then you move it into a more structured approach. So the big difference that we see is that a lot of the data is now accessible in the data lake. It is there. So that means that you have access to much more granular data that comes from all these different places. And now business users say, well, I want the data. I need that data. I want you to build me a semantic model that I can use in Power BI that gives me access to all this data. So then what do we do? Because now things become way more complicated.
Of course, I don't see any problem with that. I'm just, my consideration is that I have to understand why when I have, let's try to see this from another point of view. I'm uncomfortable in thinking that my data that was originated from a relational database with all the validation you might have in a model in a relational database becomes just a bunch of files in a folder. Okay, this is brutally what my feeling. The moment the infrastructure I have integrates the information that I want in some way, I'm more comfortable. So I don't really care about the physical representation of the data in the storage. There are many advantages in using the files. I get this. The scalability you might have for concurrent access is incredible if you compare it with a traditional relational database, because you go read-only, so you're not changing data over time. And makes sense, makes absolutely sense. But the problem is that I want to confuse just the presence of a technology is not a solution by itself.
Of course, yeah.
Before the data lake, it was possible to do exactly the same thing. It was just, more complex. Maybe that there was a distance. Okay, I get this. There was a distance, so you needed more authorization and blah, blah, blah. But when we talk about governance, we have the same problem, because the reason why I was not able to access the relational database, maybe not just because I didn't have the connector, maybe I didn't have the authorization to do that. And so how do you regulate this? So you still need a few tools in the data lake once you have critical data. Of course, if we are talking about large volume data with low importance for a single detail, imagine the telemetry of anything, almost anything, probably we want to use something like the data lake. But at the same time, think about the telemetry for health devices. You have a problem with the privacy of the data that you have to manage, right? And so I don't know the technologies so well about data lakes to manage that, but I see the same problems that exist also in the relational world. And in the relational world, you have systems just to manage the security for those companies that need it. But once again, not everybody has the same requirement. And I don't think that, so what I'm trying to say is that I don't think that the data lake is a game changer, unless for a specific company. Okay, a company was stopped because their ERP was unreachable. They have a situation that made it hard to access the data.
Mm-hmm.
So also considering the data volume and the cost to implement it, the data lake could be an effective solution. I get this.
But I think
the main solution to a technical problem is not a solution to a process problem. This is what I'm trying to say.
I totally get it, but I think what we are seeing at this moment in time is like this perfect storm. There is this new technologies that become available, and that allows people to migrate systems that they've been having and running for many years and say, okay, now with this new technology, you have access to this more to data that we never had before, as you said, because they couldn't, it was too hard, the policies in place. And now they're starting to think, okay, we need to create this data culture where we give this data accessible to a lot of people, but they are kind of struggling with actually giving access. They just say, okay, well, we need everything. So we need to have semantic models that talk to all the data, that shows me all the individual rows and data. And then they start to, okay, so what do I do now? That makes sense. I think that's the perfect storm they're in. Which technology it is, I agree, it doesn't matter. But the data lake technology and the thing it's exactly at the right place at the right time.
I don't know. I'm just not excited as you are, because from my perspective, it's it's like the fear of missing out. So you see many companies that just talk about this without really understanding what they're talking about. And we can have a conversation about that. And of course, we understand what we're talking about. Problem is that when I see statements made by IT managers that says, oh no, we have to go there because this is all the future is there, and they don't really know what they're talking about. I mean, just give you an example. Imagine you have an ERP with a lot of tables with strange names in a strange language. I don't want to, but if you just copy all the tables with the same names into the data lake, does it make a change? Or I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that the problem is the physical access to the data.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay? And so, and my concern is that behind the technology, sometimes is a way for maybe a large consulting firm to sell a project. It is very, very expensive, that move the data from one place to another, and the day after, the company will discover, and now that we had the data lake, what can we do? So again, if you know that the physical access to the data is the bottleneck that you have, but the structure, everything else is solved, of course, that is the solution that you are looking for. If you don't know how to transform the data that you already have, that's another completely different problem. And my perception is that most of the companies are in that space and not in the other.
Yeah.
In 2022, I don't think that many companies have a physical problem to access the data. They have a problem in extracting information from the data, which is a completely different problem, which the data lake by itself doesn't solve. That's my point of view. So maybe I'm too critical, but
no, I think it makes sense. I think a lot of people are working on through this and figuring out what to do. Okay, so let's ask another question. So we're talking about enterprise data models, right? So let's say I'm an organization and I'm purely self-service today, but I do see the need now for me to build this sales model for my sales team or the people on the factory floor or who are running my stores. I want to give them a dashboard where they can see how many people are sick in their office, and do we have enough products and things like this. How would you start? What advice would you give them to get going?
So, well, it depends, right? The first answer of a consulting depends.
Of course. I was waiting for this for so long, and we took 50 minutes to get to it depends.
Well, no, it depends because, of course, it depends on what you have. So let's say that I can describe a few scenarios, right? So scenario number one, you just have the data in a relational database or in a structured way. Okay, it could be also data flow or data lake, but it's a structured way. So it's not just a bunch of tables. You also have data types, relationships, something that you can use to get a sense of the data that you have. If you know that this is, so if you have to do a short-term solution, so you just have to produce some number in the shortest amount of time, do whatever you can to get the number. So just import the data, try to play with the data, create some measure, do some transformation internally, do something fast. But if you know that the model will be used later to create reports, maybe made by other people, this is the last thing that you want to do. The first thing that you want to do is you want to understand what are the business entities that you want to describe, because the best way to create your model is to create a representation of the model that describes in a small and simple set of tables the business entities that you have. Call them dimensions, but they are just the tables with attributes of your business entities.
Yeah.
You do that and you say, Marco, but I have the data this way. Indeed, I prefer to design the schema without having any idea of the data source. So in an ideal world, as a consultant, I open the whiteboard and I ask, okay, what do you need? And I start to create the list of the attributes below each business entity. Once I complete this,
sounds very Kimball.
It is Kimball.
Yes,
it is Kimball. Because when you think about the dimensional modeling, is about a way to define a model for the analysis, right? It's the performance issue is just a side effect. Okay, a star schema is more efficient. Okay, fine. The real value of the star schema is that you have to solve problems to avoid creating a technical debt that will force you to have problems at query time, to understand the numbers, performance, ambiguity in what you obtain, a lot of things. Things. So if you do this homework up front, you say, okay, I want this, right? Which is open to be extended in the future, but is a baseline. Because if you don't even know what the business entities are in your company, we have a problem. I mean, do you have trucks, customer? Do we work with planes? Do we have I don't know, submarines? Do we have what are the business entities we have? Do we have a classical company, customer, products, sales orders? But in healthcare, you have a completely different set of entities. If you go in mining, you have different set of entities because they do plans for 30 years to organize the production of this extraction of the metals from them. It's completely different, but they know what they're looking for. And when you do this work without looking at the model first, it's much simpler. If you talk with the business people, it's simple. They don't have the complexity of the model in mind. They have a clear idea of the business entities that you want. Now, once you set your goal, okay, this is my goal, I want to obtain that. Okay, now let's take a look at the data that we have and let's try to see how I can go from A to B, obtaining the structure. You might discover you don't have all the data that you need. At that point, you start a technical problem, right? And at that point, we use all the technologies that we have.
Yeah.
The other way around, in my experience, is always difficult. If you start importing a bunch of data and then you try to adjust the data model over time, usually you spend more. I understand that it is a necessary learning path for many people. But as a consultant, with my experience, I had to say, you want to be more productive, do this meeting at the beginning, at the very beginning. Oh, we have the data in this structure. I don't care. I want to talk with the business. I want to know what they want. Once I know what they want, I have my, okay, this is my goal. Now let's see where the data is. And I might discover, oh, look, they want this detail, and the detail that I need is not in the database, is somewhere else. Where? I have to discover it. Maybe it's in SharePoint, maybe it's somewhere else. But I know that I need it, and I know that I will have to create transformation, structure, everything, and so on. So it's the same reason why I say, okay, the data lake doesn't solve this problem. The data lake is just, if I have the data lake, probably what I need is there. But first of all, I want to know what I need. And the data lake doesn't tell me, because it's just a lot of data that I might be confused if I look at the data initially.
Makes a lot of sense. So the recommendation is also read the Data Warehouse Toolkit book by Kimball, right? I mean, that's...
Yes, don't be... I think that this is a huge topic, but Kimball... So Alberto and I are not fan of Kimball for the data warehouse. We believe that the data mart is the right thing to do with the dimensional methodology. While if you build a data warehouse, the classical data warehouse that nobody is creating anymore, but if we go to the original definition of the data warehouse, a completely dimensional model for the data warehouse after a few years has a few problems. That is our experience. And from that point of view, a better balance is using Inman for a variation of Inman for the data warehouse and Kimball for the data mart. Just to clarify. So even though the book of Kimball is called the Data Warehouse Toolkit, but also Kimball makes a difference between data mart and data warehouse. And we completely get the problem of the data warehouse using Kimball, but after so many years, it's hard to say that the data mart should be created using the Kimball methodology. Also, those alternative methodologies like Vault, for example, or I think there are a few others now emerging, they have a different approach for the data warehouse, not for the data mart.
Yeah,
and so many people tend to confuse the two things, but the idea is that we might consider few companies have a real data warehouse, enterprise data warehouse, where everything is a single place. And the data lake could be the attempt to provide another technical infrastructure to implement a data warehouse. I don't believe it works well, but it's another problem. But it's clear that the data mart should be designed this way, not because of the performance, not because of the technology, but because it solves a business problem, which is define the business entities you want to analyze and provide a clear and easy way to create a reporting tool that navigates into the data. We haven't seen a better idea since the data mart with Kimball. That's the reality.
Yeah.
As soon as someone has a bright idea, oh, we have this bright idea, this is better, and solves not the technical problem, but the business problem, welcome. I would like to know. But so far, I haven't seen one.
And actually, in the Data Warehouse Toolkit, there's two really, if you ask me, there's two different phases in the book. The initial book is the discovery, exactly as you were talking about, with the dimensions and the attributes and writing it down. And then the second part goes into, okay, now we're actually going to build a data warehouse. So I usually tell people to read the first part for sure, because it helps you in everything that you do. Like I like to call it like, if you do it this way, you don't have to go resort to DAX gymnastics in the end to get your business problems solved. And then you have to, which also job security, because then they can call you to go fix the problem. But okay, so great. So let me ask you the last question. and it's not related to enterprise data models. I think we got a really good idea about it. Data model, enterprise data models. It definitely has a place. I am of the same opinion. It's not just self-service. There is definitely a merit to it. But these days we can have, in the past it used to be there's only enterprise data models in the multidimensional days because there was nothing else available. Yeah, Excel or Access. And that is really not controllable and also not that fast. So now it's and this is why I love the code word Gemini, right? Gemini is the twins, self-service and IT working together. So I definitely believe it. So let me ask you the last question, and it's not related to this, but what is the most exciting feature of Power BI that we released in the last year for you?
So this is a problem because I think that in 2021, technically, so do you talk about preview or general availability?
I think it doesn't matter.
Okay. Now this is important because so far, for example, I think that actually technically the preview of the composite model started in 2020, I think, December 2020.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
So it's technically not 2021, but to be honest, it's not released yet, so it's not generally available. So we're still in preview. After
I think it's okay.
Sorry.
We'll count it as this year.
Yeah. Okay. So if we count the composite models this year, it's yeah, of course, that definitely that is the biggest feature I have ever seen in the industry. So it's not just Power BI. I clearly remember we wanted this feature in multidimensional. Not we, users consuming the model in multidimensional dreamed about a day when they would have been available, they would have been able to get a simple Excel table and merge it together to do a budget comparison using hierarchies and so on. And today this is possible. It has been a long journey. People should not think that just because I'm saying that, oh, now we have to use composite model. No, composite model had to be used only if and when you need them, right? If we have been able to survive so many years without composite models, it means that we can live without them for many other years. Or, in other words, the use case for a composite model is not, it should not be the default. Okay, it's not the default. The default is I open Power BI Desktop or Excel, I connect to a data set, and I navigate, and I look at the data they want. That is the standard way of work. I create a report, I everything. Sometimes I need to cross the data that I have in that model with something else, and at that time, instead of doing a copy and paste of the tables or of the things that I have in Excel, like I was used to do until 1 year ago, now I can just say, oh, wonderful. And now I bring my table. I have this different classification of products, and I apply these 2 lines, and I create my new report. And in 10 minutes, done.
Yeah.
That is huge. So composite models are a big win when you think about using it in the simplest possible way. Just add a table, create a relationship, and it just works. I will not use the composite model to say, oh, now we use one model for the tables, another model just the relationships, and another model just for the measures. Guys, don't do that. I mean, if you are looking for trouble, this is the best way to create huge issues. So don't do that. The fact that we can do something doesn't mean we should do something. It's just a good to know. We can do that in case of need. And sometimes you might have a very, very strange need, but it should be the exception, not the rule. And certainly you should not base an infrastructure saying, I have a user that systematically connect to a composite model that I created at the enterprise level. So my enterprise model is a composite model. We have to talk. There is something that doesn't work. The composite model should be a way to extend a model, pretty much for self-service BI, as we call it before. So something that is unmonitored, that it doesn't matter that you cannot publish the model or you cannot have other users using it, but it should be just, you know, something local to a department, or not something that is becomes okay. You have 10,000 people connecting to a composite model that is the combination of 5 different models maintained by 5 different teams. Guys, we have to talk.
Yeah.
Okay, so
makes sense. Cool. Well, I want to thank you very much for your time. I think it was really interesting. We talked about a lot of things. Enterprise data models, data lakes, composite models, Kimball. So it's really good. Thank you for your time. I hope I'm seeing you. SQL Bits hopefully is the next spot where I can see you. So that's going to be really good, and hoping things will open up and we can see each other in person again too.
Of course.
So thank you.
Great.
And have a great day.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Kasper.
Thank you. And that concludes another episode of Kasper On BI. I hope you've enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed the discussion on enterprise data modeling, data lakes, all of the things that are happening and we see around us every day. If you like the episode, please hit the like button. If you want to hear more, if you want to see more, subscribe to either my channel on YouTube, or I have all of these discussions available as podcasts too in all your favorite providers. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and I hope to see you next time.